again for joining me today. Well, me and Hannah. We're here to talk about branding for learning. And I think the first thing to say to you guys is, this is a 30, 45-minute webinar top. So, we're not going to be able to cover every single thing when it comes to branding. It's not going to be a magical masterpiece. And now you're going to be like, yes, I know everything I ever needed to know about branding. But I'm going to give you a lot of food for thought, hopefully. And I'm going to give you some places and spaces to really start to think about what it means to represent yourselves to your learners and how you can best communicate and convey the things that you want to. Because I think that's some of the stuff that we'll talk about today. You have a brand whether you like it or not. And so it's up to you whether you want to own that or you want them to make up their own minds. So without further ado, sorry, Han, can you admit people? You're not a host, are you? Hold on, I'm just gonna make you a host. Sorry guys, one sec. I'm just gonna make Hannah a host so that we can, she can continue to admit people. Otherwise, it's going to distract me. Okay.
Lovely.
Well, it would help if I'd stop skipping slides. There we go. All right. So first things first, this is something I always say to you guys, it's something we need to be okay with. Our learners don't necessarily care about our learning. It's up to us to make them care. I've never really encountered anybody who's like, ooh, an e-learning module, please let me do it. Oh, a new LXP, I can't wait to use it. These aren't discourses and dialogues that people have. That doesn't mean they can't have them, but the reality is there's not necessarily a lot of enthusiasm when it comes to organizational development, performance management, and education within the workplace. Now, whether that's a legacy problem and, we've been dominated by compliance and there's some of that old school ways in doing and thinking that still exist, nevertheless, that's the mindset that our people have. And we need to be okay with the fact that nobody really cares. It's up to us to make them care. It's up to us to capture their hearts and minds. It's up to us to touch their freaking hearts, okay? So it's up to us to really grapple with what's going on in their brains and in their hearts and understand the landscape and the lay of the land that we exist in already, rather than trying to be something that we're not. So branding helps us do that. Branding is a lot of things, which we'll touch on in a bit, but it's how we represent ourselves to our people. So it's a combination of a lot of different components, of which a logo plays a very small part. I see a lot of infatuation with logos all the time, but a logo is such a small component. It's still a component, but it's not the only part of a brand. For example, look at MAAS. We are a variety of images, but there's a look and a feel to us, as well as our tone of voice. And our logo obviously is a factor. It hopefully is starting to become recognizable, but primarily that's not the brand. So we need to use our brand to take ourselves out of our L&D space and get us into a place where we can represent ourselves in a way that's going to resonate with our learners, ultimately with the aim to convince them that learning is something they should be committing their time to. Learning is something that they should care about, that they should have an interest in. But unless we work hard through that, that's not going to happen. It's not going to magic itself. Again, if we just introduce a new e-learning, a new platform, in and of itself, that's not necessarily going to change the mindsets and perspectives that your people already have. And that's the point, really, isn't it? They've already got these fixed mindsets about what learning is in your workplace. So primarily, do you want to own that narrative, or do you want them to own that narrative? Because that is what branding is about. It's about you saying, this is who we are. This is what we want you to feel. This is the experience that you're going to have. Not them making their minds up. Oh, I did that compliance e-learning 3 years ago. It was crap. I'm not doing it again. That's not the narrative that you want, but people have that and it exists. So branding can really help you to start to change those perspectives over time. I'm not saying if you introduce a new logo and some new pretty pictures that everyone's going to think really differently about who you are as a learning brand. But over time, you can start to shift those perceptions. You can start to change the emotional drivers that exist within these people. You can affect their feelings in a positive or a negative way, depending on what you're trying to do with the brand. But primarily, it's up to you to own that. So what is a brand? I hear pineapples are kind of effective these days, but is it a logo? Is it pictures? Is it sexy wordsmithing? Is it tone of voice? Is it social media? What could it be? Well, I think it's pretty much all of those things and so much more. It's not just about the visuals. It's not just about the tone of voice, the logo. All those things stitched together to create a feeling, an emotion. There's a reason why, say, I don't know if you guys have been keeping aware of Brewdog and all the stuff that's been going on with them in the past week. They've worked really hard at creating a perception of a brand through their marketing. They do all this pragmatic stuff. They give back to communities. They're very invested in certain philanthropic entities. But it turns out that the culture in their business is actually completely different to what they're projecting outwards. Not uncommon. We see it all the time in our industry and elsewhere. But the reality is they have constructed a brand through visuals, through their social presence, through their digital presence online, through their branding, their cans, the sense of humor, when they did that thing with Aldi, because Aldi started copying their beer and then they did a joint effort thing. There's a whole plethora of things, but really these brands are interacting with us every day, and you are interacting with your learners every single day as an L&D function. So what feelings and emotions are you conjuring up with them? How do you make them feel now? How do you want to make them feel? Those two things might not necessarily be the same, and that's okay. But we need to start to think about how we present ourselves in order to change those feelings, to change those emotions. So there's a lot to a brand, as I said, and I have included some of the key ones that I think make up a component. As I said, you'll see logo there. Colors can play a really important factor in terms of color psychology. Certain colors convey certain things. Whilst I wouldn't necessarily get too fixated on, we can't use red because it's an emotional color and la-di-da-di-da. It's more about the energy that those colors project, in my opinion, and how they work together to create a look and a feel rather than a single color. Other things that I think are really interesting, especially from the learning perspective, is your learning experience is a part of your brand. So I'll touch on this again throughout the session today, but one of the big things for me is the fact that it's all good and well us doing a brand, right? Say you develop something snazzy and sexy, but then people log in and your e-learning is made in 1996 and it is drag and drop, boring, terrible, next button, or, your LMS is Blackboard and it's not necessarily the most sleek or engineered learning experience. That is not a consistent message for somebody. So, you draw them in, they got this really excited, okay, I'm very interested. And then they have this really crummy experience. That isn't going to work, and that's really going to disconnect people. So my first comment, I suppose, about the branding that you're going to do for your L&D function is understanding the context of the lay of the land that you exist in. If you do have outdated systems or you do have older learning solutions, that's a problem in and of itself. Over time, it might disengage your learners. But what we don't want to do is project something that's really different to the experience that they're going to have. So you need to accept that this is who we are right now. We need to represent that in an accurate way, because otherwise what you're going to do is you might actually get people interested, and you've taken that one first impression that you've got and you've completely lost it by disengaging them as soon as they actually log in and they do the things that you want them to do. So I think some other stuff that is worth looking at, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, particularly is your unique selling proposition. Now, those of you in L&D maybe don't think about your USPs at all. why should somebody undertake your learning? What's of value to them? What's in it for them? If I was developing a brand for a product or a service or a multitude of different businesses that we've done this for, we think about not only the target audience, but we also think about, what are we trying to say to them? What angles can we leverage? Who's going to resonate best with this? And how can we best project ourselves to that audience? How can we draw out our USPs? How can we showcase what we do? So when I developed the MAAS brand, for example, I wanted us to look like a fresh, edgy agency. We're B2B, which is often terribly, dreadfully dry and boring. So I knew that something very visually vibrant would really stand out, not only on the humdrum of LinkedIn and what I see there, but also, with what you're looking at right now. So our visual identity, our proposals, things like that, it really, really is quite stark. And that's intentional to get attention. So again, what is it about your learning and your learning experiences and the L&D proposition as a whole that's going to really anchor and connect to people? So where I suggest you get started, I had a really big think about this, because obviously brand is a kind of ineffable thing in many senses. It's kind of a something and a nothing. It is a feeling. It is a, how does Disney make you feel versus Airbnb versus, now maybe Brewdog or something like that. There's always feelings and emotional drivers attached to those brands, because that's what moves mountains. That's what makes people move. That's what makes people buy or make choices, is those emotional drivers. So I want you to start by doing a value proposition canvas. So I'll send everybody this after the session, but I really want you to spend some time thinking about what you're trying to achieve with a brand. So, it isn't just a case of some colors and a logo. Woohoo, that's our brand. No. What are we actually trying to accomplish? What do we want people to think about L&D in our organization? What do we want? Is it, Novartis do a lot around curiosity and things like that. They've spent a long time developing. We want our learners to be curious. We want to foster and cultivate that thinking and feeling. So if that's your agenda, how do you best communicate that in your visual identity? What shows curiosity? And please, not stock images of people doing, hands-on chins. Yeah, there you go. Hannah's doing another example. No, let's not do cliches, but think about that. What are we trying to accomplish? What do we want them to think? What do we want them to feel when they interact with you? Of course, we want them to love the experiences that they're having. We want them to give a crap about your learning. We want them to invest in your learning, because that makes them invest in themselves, and that ultimately improves their performance within the organization, hopefully. There's a lot of ifs there, but we get the idea nevertheless. And really, what are we trying to trigger here? What emotions are there that we're trying to draw out? So I've put this together. You'll see that if you just Google value proposition canvas, there's like 1,000 online. I've just done a MAAS one with some really nonsensical icons just for banter. But primarily what we've got on the left here is really thinking about your product. So your learning brand, what are the benefits to learners? What are the features? What do they get? Is it on demand? Is it anywhere, available anywhere, anytime? Is there, specific types of content that you think are very interesting to that audience? And what's the experience like? Is it visceral? Is it modern? Is it, I wouldn't necessarily go to market and be like, hey, we've got a really old school platform that you might want to come, but it's still worth thinking about, what is the experience that our learners have? Because again, that will give you that critical context that I was talking about in terms of understanding the lay of the land and not pitching yourself here when what you've got is here. You're better off aligning with what you've got, because at least your learners' expectations are managed throughout that entire process. It's like me doing some advertising on LinkedIn, like, oh, these amazing things are happening. And then they come on this really outdated web page that looks like it was built in 1996. People buy into stuff. And if you disconnect with them in that way, it's really hard to get that engagement back once it's lost. And then on the right, you're going to look at your learners. So if you were on the last webinar, we talked a lot about learner personas. So I hope that maybe you've undertaken some persona work between then and now, but primarily look at one of your main personas here. So ideally, we don't want to just talk to our learners as a whole because that's quite large. So ideally, talk to your primary persona. And again, let's look at what their wants are, what their fears are, what their needs are. Again, these are all the emotional driver stuff. This is all the what's in it for me stuff. This is going to help you to understand how you can best position yourself visually, tone of voice, the overall learning experience, etc., the colors that you use, go on and on and on. So I really, if you have further questions about a value prop canvas later, we can pick those up at the end. But this is a really good place to start. I've done it for my business. I've done it for services that we've developed, and I've worked with a multitude of clients, especially smaller organizations who are kind of new to market and don't necessarily haven't really reflected fully on what it is that they do, what it is that their audience wants, and how they best kind of match those two things up. So it is a really, really credible process for you to go through. So I highly recommend undertaking it. And this is why we're going to do it. You know, we're going to understand what's going to resonate with our learners. How can you align to this? What do they love and hate? What really grinds their gears? You know, I think that we don't use negative emotions enough. You know, we often take action as people when there's pain involved. So, you know, if I think about some of the choices that I've made in my life, for example, a lot of them have been driven by difficulties or to move away from pain in one way or another. So, you know, we're not talking about pulling a splinter out of a foot, but you know, at the end of the day, if someone can't do their job effectively, that is a splinter in their foot. It's causing them a lot of pain. Maybe it's only a tiny amount of pain, but on a day-to-day basis, quite annoying. So again, think about those emotions. You know, how are you solving their problems? How can you talk to their pain points? Of course, we've already talked about that on the value prop. So you'll have some clearer ideas about the things that are really driving your learners to learn, or at least to help them improve what they do on a day-to-day basis in their job. How can you use those emotions to connect with them? And ultimately, this is going to help you to better understand and cultivate the sentiments and emotions that you want those people to have. So it isn't just a case of, oh, well, this is what they want and need. So we understand that, you know, how do we then communicate that? How do we then visually showcase that? How do we talk to them in a way that makes sense? You know, I mean, generally speaking, just ditch the business talk. I think, you know, you're talking to humans. So we could spend a long time talking about tone of voice, but if you want my honest opinion, just be candid, just be human, just be yourselves. And people resonate a lot more with that than anything else. So, you know, rather than spending hours developing a tone of voice, just say, hey, let's just be human. You know, it's okay to be human. That's absolutely fine. So, as you've probably garnered a bit from what I've said so far, is everything has baggage. Everything has preconceptions. You know, if I look at a color, it might make me think of a specific memory that I have. If I see a specific logo or a house that looks like a house that I used to look at, or, you know, there are all my memories and they all have baggage. So we have to accept that there are preconceptions with everything, and we have to be mindful of those preconceptions. And it's one of the biggest hurdles, I think, when it comes to branding, is really overcoming those preconceptions in people. Because, you know, you have to think, okay, well, if I use this image, what's that going to make people think? And what could sometimes people don't see it. You know, people do not see it. You know, I've seen brands and logos that look great when you just glance at them, but then they don't align with the product or the value proposition of the business. So, you know, you've really got to start with that value prop first, because then you can build up from there. Like, okay, this is what we want to be. How can we best represent that? What world are we living in? You know, even things like, and I'm going to show you some examples on the next few slides, but fonts, stupid, right? Oh, it's just a font. No. This is an incredibly important part of a brand, because they all communicate something, you know, subconsciously. Every visual that you are projecting, every language, it's a language that you're using. So if we're using, you know, MAAS has big uppercase all the time because we're loud and we're in your face and we're bullshit and stupid, right? That's what we're doing. flowery, flouncy, curvy, very arty, you know, has more of those kind of perceptions. You know, we see a lot of tech companies using lowercase, for example, at the moment. And I'll show you just a couple of examples. So have a real think about this, because it's not to be overlooked, really. You know, we do need to think a lot about what everything is saying to those people. And is it saying the things that we want them to say? Is it saying the things that are really, really going to connect with people? Going back to your value prop. So I wanted to look at a few brands, because I think, as I've said to you, you know, if you've joined a few of the webinars, for me, branding is all about building trust. It is the fundamental aspect of marketing. You know, if we get clients coming and saying to us, you know, I need leads yesterday, my first thing is to look at their brand and see what sort of audience they have, what sort of engagement they have. Because if they haven't got an audience and they don't therefore have trust with people, then they're a long road away from getting new customers. So really what we're trying to do is build trust first and foremost. And that is through our visual language, our consistency of messaging, through our logo, our visuals, our fonts, our values, our learning experience, etc., etc. All of that needs to be consistent and presented consistently in order for people to start to feel that they can trust this experience and rely on it and believe what you're saying when you're saying it's the best learning experience you're ever going to have in your life. Please go spend some time on it right now. So let's look at some logos. So I just Googled cursive logos, but it was interesting to see that a lot of these are kind of either trying to project creativity, or I thought the Ray-Ban one was quite interesting because they're obviously kind of trying to say we're a bit edgy, we're a bit funky, we're a bit more modern. You know, obviously the Stella one, I've never heard of Stella Stevenson, but again, looks immediately like it should be a art brand or I don't know, some sort of museum or graphic designer, or you know, the list goes on. But
I think jewelry as well.
Jewelry, yeah, exactly. But it's all creative
Visually
space, creative and arts. Yeah. And so, you know, it's interesting. In Fender, the same, you know, you think Fender guitars, great, all hardcore rock, but actually like they're really trying to say they're creative. So I just thought that was like super duper interesting. And then the same again, just looking at, you know, tech businesses, they all use freaking lowercase. You know, they're all using lowercase. And what are they trying to say? We're approachable, we're young, we're modern, we know what we're doing. You know, they're using, I mean, look, eBay and Slack are using primary colors. This is essential. This is fundamental. We aren't trying to, you know, we're just here to help and we're going to solidify ourselves into your day-to-day lives. Primary colors. Salesforce, Facebook, tech, blue. Shocker. Nevertheless, you know, these, I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever gone to learning technologies back in the day when we could go to expos, but there's always a lot of blue and white, I find. You know, people somehow down the line have associated technology with blue. But I think it's interesting to see that, again, you know, these brands are they're all trying to say different things, but they're following all these weird tacit rules because they understand the preconceptions that exist in people's minds. They understand that if they use a lowercase rather than a capital, it's going to have a different look and feel, but it's also going to make people feel something different. So make sure, first and foremost, that you are presenting yourselves consistently. So once you've done your value prop, and you start to understand, you know, what are we offering to our people? What do they want and need? How can we best convey and communicate that through our visual language, through our logo, through our typography, through our colors, etc., etc. Make sure that that aligns with the learning experience that they are going to have, because I think this is a really, really important part of L&D branding that isn't always, I mean, it's definitely a factor externally, but I think it's even more so internally, because you're fighting so hard to get people to even pay attention. You need to make sure that when you do get their attention, and that first impression is the best that they can have. You know, if you're over promising and under delivering, they'll only fall for that once, and that's the reality of it. So you're much better understanding where you are, understanding your lay of the land, in order to effectively build trust with your audiences, which is what's going to make them move over time. These are some stats that I found online that have nothing to do with marketing and L&D, of course, but it's still the same. I believe that the same rules apply because you are still just marketing to people. You are still just trying to trigger thoughts and feelings in their brains, regardless of whether they're at work or they're sat at home flicking through Instagram in front of the telly at night watching Netflix. Consistent branding can increase a company's revenue by up to 23%. Conflicting brand usage results in a 56% damage to brand credibility. This is the consistency piece that I'm talking about. Not an overpromise, underdeliver. We are who we say we are. Your experience is going to be exactly what we say. It is what it's what am I trying to say about being on the tin? It does what it says on the tin. There we go. Geez, got there eventually. So I think that that's really, really important, and again, the consistently presenting yourself helps to increase visibility as well, because you are actually being present, So again, when I've spoken to clients in the past and I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing from a marketing perspective? Like, oh, we post on LinkedIn sometimes, or, oh, we send our learners an email when a new module comes out. That's not enough consistency to build yourself in a presence of mind. Everybody who's here today has registered for this webinar because they've either attended a different webinar and I've sent them an email telling them that this one's happening, or they've seen my LinkedIn post. And LinkedIn, for example, I post 3 to 4 times a week. I don't always post about MAAS. I very rarely actually post about what we do as a business. I just generally try to stay present and keep front of mind with people, because when they're ready to have a conversation with me, they know what I do and they will come to me. And that's what you need to start thinking about with your learners. You're really trying to move from this push to a pull. You're trying to draw them in. You're trying to get them engaged and interested, but you need to do the work first. You need to consistently present yourselves to them. You need to build trust, and your brand needs to be an integral part of that. It's all good and well saying, okay, well, we're going to send some emails, we're going to do some stuff on, our Teams or Slack or whatever. What does that look like? Does it feel organized? Does it feel purposeful? Does it feel like it's trying to accomplish and achieve something? Again, if it's just done on an ad hoc basis, it's going to feel ad hoc, and people are going to start to disconnect with it over time because nothing links with one another. At least if you've got some sort of strong visual identity, people will connect more. They'll at least know, oh, that's from the learning, whatever, if you have a specific name for it, or if you're just L&D, whatever. So I wanted to just leave you with this final parting thought, and then we can open the floor for questions. I'm very mindful that this has been a whirlwind, but if your learning looks like this, then you can't build a brand like this. Do we see the disconnect? It just doesn't work, because this is saying, okay, this is sleek, this is something edgy, this is something interesting. This is potatoes on a chopping board. So we have to be real with ourselves here, guys. I know that we can't change the world, and sorry, I have to get rid of that e-learning. We can't change the world overnight. We are where we are in L&D, and we can't always make massive changes overnight. But what we can do is really start to understand what we are, and understand our identity and how we can best project that outwards. Branding is way more than a logo. A logo will help, but unless you really understand what you're trying to do with that logo, unless you really understand what you're trying to communicate and convey and project outwards, the logo is inconsequential. The logo doesn't matter really. And if you really think about it, if we're trying to convey the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings, the logo becomes quite inconsequential because people recognize it. But if you've worked hard on that emotional side of things, it doesn't really matter what the logo says. It's more about the visual language, in my opinion, and, those emotional experiences that people have. So really have a think about what's going to get their attention. What's going to make you stand out? We know learners are inundated with internal comms and a huge amount of messaging externally outside of the business. You're vying for their attention. So what's going to get them interested? Yes, a brand. First and foremost, stand for something, represent yourselves in a way that really does justice to all the incredible work that you're doing in L&D to help people develop themselves. But also make sure that you're really effectively marketing yourself and getting yourself out there consistently, not just when you have a new e-learning module or some compliance learning, adding value to people, being useful over time. Can you curate a range of resources for people? And, how can you start to engage in a way that's more meaningful rather than we have this thing, you can have it now. So I think that was the parting thought that I wanted to leave you guys with. I'm conscious that I haven't been able to tell you, how you build a logo, how you build a brand, because it's a big thing. But what I wanted to do today was plant some seeds and ideas for you guys to take away and really start to cultivate in yourselves to think, what are we trying to do here? What does learning mean to our learners now? And is that where we want it to be? So I think I will finish there. I will open the floor to you guys. We always just put our videos on and have a chat. So I'm going to stop my screen share. But primarily, if you guys have any questions, give me a shout. Otherwise, I will give you your time back. Cool. Okay. Well, wow. Resounding silence. I will take it. Okay, so this has been recorded, so I'll edit everything and send it over to you guys. But yeah, if you have any questions, give me a shout. We can always have a one-on-one chat. But really, I think the key takeaway is just do that value prop, which I'll send to you with the recording. But really have a think about what do we want people to feel? What are the emotional drivers that are gonna really connect with our people? I will say this until my face turns blue. But really what we're trying to do is connect. And, if we just are sending ad hoc messaging, thanks, CJ. Matthew, Go on then. You can just put your mic on if you want.
No, I'll put my camera on. Hello.
Hey.
Hiya. The emotional thing sort of got me thinking, like we in my organization, we're a charity that have a lot of colleagues based out in the field, and so they don't get the opportunity to sort of check in with the organization a lot because they're often off doing other things, and they might check their phone at the end of a shift or maybe check emails when they get back to the office. So I'm sort of struggling with the concept that we want to connect with people's emotions, because if we're getting them to think emotionally or they're reacting emotionally, is that the best thing when it comes to some of the serious stuff that we might talk about in our learning? I want to get people to think sort of think logically about some of the learning that they're going to do. So is it always about emotions? And if it's not, how do we sort of play into that other stuff that we want them to do?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I wouldn't necessarily look at it in such a black and white way, i.e. you have a logical side or an emotional side. I think sometimes emotions get a bad rap, like, oh, you're emotional, that means that, I'm crying in a corner, or, I wear my heart on my sleeve. But really, when we're talking about marketing in particular, the things that really... So what we're trying to do, let me ask you a point blank question. What are you trying to accomplish with learning in your organization?
Don't know yet. Yeah, I think that is a really difficult question to answer for us. So it's, I think it's, what would it be? I think acceptance is probably the word I would use. Learning doesn't live comfortably amongst all the other things that we're asking people to do. So it's probably back to what you said at the very start. People don't really give two hoots about that. So yeah, we're trying to find our place, I suppose. And that got me thinking, if that's, if we're in that position, we don't want to sort of trick people into doing learning by playing on their emotions. But I guess what you're saying is it's never that straightforward.
No. So are you doing predominantly compliance training? Are you quite led by compliance by the sounds of things?
Yeah, I would say so. I'm new to the organization. I've only been here a few months, but I get a strong sense that that's what's going on. That it's your typical health and safety stuff to keep us out of jail, and not a lot else just now.
Yeah, I mean, but then there's still, I think if I were you, still do that value prop, because even if you are only doing compliance, and sorry to put the qualifier of only in front of that, but if you're doing compliance training, or that is dominating the majority of your learning function, and that's very much the case in a lot of organizations, really, you can still create experiences for people that are conducive to what you're selling to them. Primarily, you have something that you need people to do. You want them to do it willingly so that they actually remember the information and engage with it in some way. You're not selling them the earth, moon, and stars here. And that's what I was trying to really communicate today, is it's actually understanding your learning landscape, understanding the context that you exist in. And that's why that value prop canvas will help, because if you completed that, you'd really start to understand, okay, this is what we're offering, these are the experiences that people are having, but over here we've got this cohort of people who are on the move all the time. They're really, really busy. They probably don't, really want to learn. They're definitely not interested in compliance. So, those are massively disconnected. Your business mandate is one side and the learners are completely disengaged on the other. So how can you start to persuade and present yourself in a way that connects with them? And that's when we're talking about the emotions. It's not like, terrify them. Like, if you don't do this, you're going to be fined £1 million and lose your job. But it's actually, what in those environments is going to help people be more effective from a compliance perspective. So, if we're looking at health and safety, risks, telling real stories, user-generated content, maybe, there are ways to advocate and showcase real lived experiences that can modernize what you're doing, even if you haven't, got a huge amount of modern learning content to work with. So I wouldn't say be afraid of the emotions, but understand that those are what make people move. So when we talk about triggering emotions, really we're trying to connect and resonate with people, and we do that through emotions and emotional drivers, and building trust. Like, you might decide, actually, all we really want to do is get people to understand that we're here, and if they need us, we're here. We're a reliable pair of hands. If they're feeling stuck or scared about some policy or procedure that they don't know about, we're here. There's a really strong, robust message there. But again, it goes back to building trust with them. They've got to know that you exist, first of all, and then they've got to know that if they come to you as a learning function, you can support their requirements and give them what they need. So it is still about, those are still emotions. Those are still fundamental needs that you're meeting through those emotional drivers. I don't know if does that help at all, or does that still feel like utter nonsense?
No, thank you. I get what you're saying. I think it's what I get, or what I take from that, is that it's a bit of a journey, and even if you connect with someone straight out the gate and they form a first impression, you can do things to sort of move the needle, I suppose, or move the dial and get them on board. So what I also take is that all is not lost. It's a situation that we can make better and that we can improve. So so thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I think that is it. Like, understanding where you are and being okay with that. I think sometimes, like in L&D, we're always like, where's the next biggest thing and where's the next best thing? Like, actually, what could we just be doing in our sphere of reality here? Because, we are limited budgets. We do mostly do compliance. What can we do with that? Like you said, all is not lost. There is still a need and a desire from the business for people to engage with this content. So what can you do to get them to do that? How can you connect with them? How can you?
I also think, Ash, the more work that we're doing with a range of organisations, the emotional drivers are almost more important when you say we do a lot of compliance training, because compliance training is synonymous with, oh my God, the deadline's on Friday, I'm going to do it at 4:00 on a Friday afternoon and just click through and guess the answers and hope I pass. Where actually compliance training, it's compliance for a reason. You need your learners to know it for a reason. So actually, you really want to teach them the what's in it for me. You want to connect with them on the point that actually, and okay, we're not miracle workers here, we like to think we are, but you actually want to get to a point that your learners almost want to do the compliance training. They understand why it's impactful for their job and for your business, and they're actually going to engage with it. And that's where you really need to dig down into the emotional part of it. But it takes a bit of work, and it is, as you said, it's a long journey, and you've got to dig deep. But the more and more we're talking about it, and everybody always goes, oh, but we do a lot of compliance. Actually, it's just as important there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, compliance is such a problematic thing for L&D in some ways, because it is, in many cases, the discussions I have, it's almost like compliance, we want to sit it here and kind of put it in its little box, and we don't want to, because it causes problems with the other experiences that we're trying to create and foster within our people. So if that's the majority of what you do, Matthew, then you've got to look at it in a different way, because that is your L&D function, and that is your value proposition. But there's still stuff in there. If you give me a shout separately, I'll send the value prop canvas, and if you want to chat through working through it, it will help you just to really work out what you mean to people. Even if you're making assumptions at the start, you can always validate that with some quantitative or qualitative data, ideally both. But getting some actual learner perceptions of learning, what are their lived experiences, how do they feel? If they absolutely hate it, at least you know what you're dealing with, and then you can work from there. You've almost got to draw your line in the sand and be like, okay, look, this is where we are, this is where we want to get to. What are those small incremental gains that we can make to slowly progress ourselves? So yeah.
Ash, if you don't mind,
yeah,
I'll happily jump in here, because we've gone through this process with Ash and Hannah last year from our external side of our LMS, and we were very skeptical on some of the things, especially the emotive side, but we're seeing massive improvements, so much so that we've worked on a few other projects with MAAS, and we intend to do the same thing for our internal side, because it really is making massive improvements with people engaging with us and returning customers.
Oh, thanks, CJ. I'll give you that $5 later.
I just thought, because we were skeptical at the start, especially because my team are predominantly male and our customers are predominantly female. Some of the things we looked at were like, I don't like that. And you need to step away from the I don't like to, it's what they need.
Yeah.
And some of the emotion side does come into that. And I totally get where you're coming from, Matthew, but it is definitely worth exploring.
Yeah. And
I think I can.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think I can really relate to that, because I'm in a very hierarchical structured organization in the manufacturing industry, and we have 6% of women in our workforce, and a very authoritative CEO who approves everything. Wow. Every single piece of graphic and branding, and it is a struggle. And we try to always, polish it and push a little bit of more modern and easy, young approach. Like you said, those emotions and feelings that are more subconscious. But it is a challenge, and it is a long journey.
That is one of the biggest challenges, especially when I worked in-house, having a CEO that either didn't really get marketing, certainly didn't understand branding, and wasn't really willing to look outside of themselves. And as CJ said, think beyond their perceptions. And this is what I like. It doesn't matter. We just did this whole process with the Software One brand that we launched yesterday, because they're a very B2B technology cloud services business. So they're targeting someone completely different, but they're developing an academy to kind of target Gen Z. So, kind of graduates, but also apprentices, and those looking for career changes. So really, really different audience. So obviously getting that buy-in internally and being able to actually say, here's our audience research, and this is why this is going to work. And sometimes you have to pitch it. Sometimes they still won't take the bait, and it is what it is. I've had to work with brands that don't communicate what you sell, and it's a more disjointed experience as a consequence. But getting buy-in from senior management can be quarrelsome. But do your research, do your personas, do some market research if you can. Really, really evidence and showcase why a brand refresh or an evolution of your visual identity will actually be more effective at resonating with your audience. You're trying to tap into all these new people. First impressions count. What's the first impression? Your brand. That's what they see.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Oh, I just wanted to say it is my first time at your webinar, and I've got a bit late. I'm really looking forward to seeing the part that I missed. But my feeling today is like, oh my God, you see things the way I do, or I see the things you do. I mean, talking about the details and the font and what it shows, the colors. I think, yeah, for majority is like, what are you on about? I mean, you're some kind of detail oriented. It's not anything important, but it really resonated with me. And what you're saying about the emotional connection, it's gonna stick with me, and I'm gonna take it forward. Definitely need to have more of a research, or just get more used to what kind of emotions we can showcase and how. Because probably it's a whole big process, and I'm not really into marketing. I'm more into L&D, but we've been working on like monthly newsletters, seasonal ads in the past year. So we really started from zero and built our marketing and our brand for our provision. So that brought a lot of very positive replies and engagement. And appreciation as well. Because like you said at the beginning, my idea was like, hey, it's an amazing platform. Just go and explore.
Everyone will just come. Everyone will love it. Yeah. Why aren't they here?
Why wouldn't you? And then I learned that people need guidance. They need that support. And also the emotional impact is you can induce that with your own emotions. So I could see that I'm happy, I'm energized about it. I say, look, this is great content. I think you're gonna like that. Have a check here. And also my delivery really changes their perception about it. Than just saying, well, you can have a look at here. Maybe this will be interesting. Also the way we think about it and the way we're excited about it. That's people gonna catch up on it.
That's what I mean. You might have missed it at the beginning. I was talking especially just about that, owning the narrative, know, and I think really thinking about what it is that we want our audiences to think and feel about our organizational training, the in-house learning that they experience, and what, versus what they are feeling at the moment. And are those two things the same? Probably not, in which case, you need to do a little bit more work on understanding who you are and how you present yourselves. And that's really what we've talked about today. We haven't talked about designing a logo or how to select colors, because it's more fundamental than that. We've really got to think about people, hearts and minds. And I think that's what you've said, what CJ said is the big thing that I'm trying to communicate here. Is it isn't really about what we want. It's it doesn't matter that we've got a new learning platform that we've invested 150 grand on. They don't care if they don't know it exists. First of all, they definitely don't care, and they don't care. It's not going to make them do anything differently. That's okay. But if we want them to care, we've got to invest time and energy into understanding what's going to make them care. That's what we do in marketing. That's what marketers do every day outside of L&D. And it is the exact same thing internally. How can we make people care when they don't? Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. Make them know about things they don't know about yet, care about things they don't care about. I feel like that's like a nice parting thought.
Very succinct to the point.
I think it was interesting to see Anna's comment in the chat. It's not so much about marketing after all, was it? I disagree. This is exactly what marketing is. Marketing isn't just social media posts, emails, content, blogs, images. This is marketing. Marketing, if you really boil it down, is about psychology, humans, people. How do we engage with those people? What's going on in their minds? If we need to be incredibly emotionally intelligent and also remove ourselves from our biases, our unconscious and conscious biases, and really think about our people and their lived experiences and what it is that is going to resonate with them. All right. Well, unless anyone has any other questions, I am going to go. And we will have another one soon. And like I said, Matthew, give me a shout if you have any questions or you get stuck on that value prop. But thanks for joining us. It's nice that it's been a smaller cohort today. And also, please never do the e-learning that I showed earlier, the chopping board ones. The drag and drop. I just Googled bad e-learning. And I was like, no, why does this still exist? Anyway.
Well, a lot of people think this is the way and this is the proper way.
Well, and then, again, like I think there is a lot of legacy stuff that exists. If you think really, even like our LMSs and things like that, these evolve from academia, Blackboard predominantly, right? And so they were built and created for structured curriculums, structured learning pathways and things like that. And it's how people learn in a formal education environment, but that's not the realities of the workforce whatsoever. And yes, whilst I agree that if we're trying to teach complex skills, they need to be established over a period of time, but then that still comes back to that consistency piece, and how we, how are we really going to change behavior if we're not presenting ourselves consistently, and if they're not learning regularly, if they're not engaging with what you're offering on a consistent basis. And maybe you do have to push them to do that initially, but eventually you can transition to a pull. So.
Do you think it is possible to have kind of a different brand or different values and emotions associated with different brands? I'm just thinking right now what you're saying, that our company positions and wants to present itself as a professional, we're into food industry, we deliver plastic packaging. So it's clear, it's transparent, it's very high quality, it's safe. And that's kind of the message to the customers. I'm thinking whether our internal communications to our staff could be a bit different, could be more funky, engaging, young, hey, let's see what's out there, more upbeat. Because our external brand is more traditional, solid, responsible, reliable. Whereas internally, we could be much more than that, right?
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, your business target audience is very different to the target audience that you and L&D have, right? So again, it comes back to those personas and that work, but who are we trying to reach? Who are we trying to connect with? And what's going to do that best? Ultimately, it depends if you've got an internal comms team. Sometimes they want to be quite involved in that type of stuff because they might have an established internal brand that they want you to play nice with or maybe adhere to in some cases. So it's always worth understanding what internal comms are already doing or have done on anything like that. But I definitely think that, how you present yourselves internally can be very different to how the brand is projecting itself outwards. That's a very lived experience. The company culture isn't necessarily something that's communicated in the external brand. It can be, but I think, it really comes down to what's going to be most effective for your audiences and doing that work in terms of understanding them, building out your personas, and then doing the value prop as a subsequent task will then give you that context. Who are we targeting? What do they want and need? What are we offering them? How do we best showcase all of that?
Okay, cool. Thanks.
No problem. I'm just checking. I think we saw a few other things. CJ is nodding a lot, apparently. All right. Well,
very passionate nodding from CJ.
Fabulous. Well, look, thank you so much for everybody's input. I really do try to just keep these quite casual and try to do them as regularly as I can with a baby and a business. It's the interesting times for us all. But thank you so much for your time. As I said, I will send the slides, the recording, and the value prop canvas over to you guys. Any questions, where Hannah and I are, give us a shout. Otherwise, until the next one.
Great.
All right. See you guys later.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.